Hi there, Megan Thompson here with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we are going to discuss whether or not highly sensitive kids who are sensitive by nature, based on their temperament or their biology, will grow out of their tendency to have meltdowns that is above and beyond their peers. Now, I would love to talk about also what I mean by above and beyond on today's conversation as well. So we'll definitely dive into that in addition to how this is impacting the entire family. We'll talk about that dynamic as well. So here at MTC, we help parents of highly sensitive kids eliminate daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks. And we have been doing this for over 6 years through the online community that we run. And I've been a clinician for 15 years, and I've been working in the mental health field since I was in high school. I had my first internship at a residential treatment center for children who were removed from their parents' care based on either their mental health needs or their traumatic experiences or both. So, and I've had other experiences throughout my career where I've worked in locked door facilities, residential care, or juvenile justice, as well as outpatient, community mental health, working with severely underserved populations, significantly traumatized kids, and then in private practice, both the private practice that someone else owned or the one that I owned and ran for 5 years and grew to a group practice. So for the same 5 years. So what I'd love to do is really uncover what might be running through your mind as a parent of a kiddo who experiences the world deeply, who makes thoughtful choices, who can be very compassionate, and yet also when things aren't going the way that they expect or they aren't going the way that they want, they can really struggle to the point where they're yelling or screaming or kicking or throwing things or melting down, full body on the floor, hitting, kicking, even cursing. For young children or older children, we can see this in regular, everyday, safe homes, and kids are struggling. So if this is you, I want you to listen up. I want you to know that in my mental health career, as well as in my career as a parent consultant and a parent myself, I have seen and heard nearly every single circumstance based on all of the years of my expertise and the pretty significantly severe needs that the children that I served in my earlier career had experienced. So I bring a lot of knowledge, but I also want you to notice that I speak pretty fervently about this topic because what I see more often in my coaching practice, as well as something that I saw in my career, is that parents tend to wonder whether or not their sensitive kiddo is going to grow out of this emotional intensity. And this can, this question, if you don't answer it quickly, regarding your particular child, you will end up maintaining suffering, right? So let's go ahead and it could get worse. So I want to talk about this particularly because it is near and dear to my heart. My sister's highly sensitive. My parents thought she would grow out of it. She didn't. And so I also have some personal relationship to this need and watching it unfold in my loved one's adulthood. And I've seen this with extended family as well. And so, I'd like to think that I have a pretty well-rounded perception of what's going on because I also have family members who are very high functioning and successful, and I consider myself to be one of those people. So, there is a way to raise a child who can build resiliency despite strife or a struggle to learn emotion regulation in childhood. And my question to you is what you want to sacrifice or take charge of and how early you want to be in charge of that as a parent. And we're going to unfold that through some of the examples and the stories that I'll share today. So one story that I want to highlight is a common one that we hear from a fair amount of people who reach out to us, wondering if now is the right time to eliminate the meltdown cycle. And this is the story of a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old who is 2 years, 3 years behind their peers in terms of having explosive meltdowns at home. And they're having meltdowns at home only. So kiddos generally keeping it together in the school setting. And parents have said, from this countless times, I can handle this at home, and it's happening behind closed doors, so I'm not that concerned about it. What I am concerned, however, is if this behavior spreads into their social life and other people find out, basically, right? That's not necessarily what the parent is telling me, because either they're not self-aware or they're not very blunt. But I really want you to look at this. If this is the behavior that you're seeing in your home, your child feels emotionally out of control. And that's happening now. So if your child is 4 and their meltdowns are lasting beyond 5 to 10 minutes and it's happening daily, then that is on the extreme end of a 4-year-old's healthy development. And if your child is beyond age 4, then daily meltdowns are not developmentally appropriate. And they're not developmentally appropriate for even weekly meltdowns or multiple times a week meltdowns, let alone multiple times a day meltdowns. And so if your child's development is behind, then this is definitely the show for you to determine what you need to do to turn this around. And the question can no longer be, should my child grow out of this? It should be, what specific action am I supposed to be taking right now in order to halt this slowed development for my kid? So we have some clear identification of healthy behavior. If you want to learn more about developmentally appropriate behavior, I did do a show earlier this year on what is developmentally appropriate, even for sensitive kids, neurodivergent kids, kids with executive functioning skills, needs to include ADHD, level 1 autism, because sensitive children with a sensitive temperament can have some overlap. So some of you, I know my listeners, are listening and wondering, or might have even had a diagnosis come across for your child with ADHD or level 1 autism. Doesn't mean that you're completely excluded from this show. So welcome. And if you're new to determining that your child's behavior is outside the realm of typical, then welcome as well. So this is part of that conversation. I really want to give you the opportunity to decide that when you seek support in raising your child to become more emotionally intelligent, to build their emotion regulation skills, and to be more resilient as a kiddo who is noticing small details and right now is more reactive to those in an explosive or implosive way, I want you to observe the statistics of development and really look at what I just mentioned. The age appropriate behavior means that your child, if they are 6, 7, 8, 5, 4, like closer to 5, if they're upset, they're not screaming at the top of their lungs. If they're upset, they're not stomping and running away. If they're upset, they're not slamming doors. They're not yelling. They're not hitting. And they're certainly not having a meltdown on a regular basis. And if your child is doing that, even if it's only happening at home, then you need to take a long, hard look at whether or not you want your child to continue to suffer while you're hoping for them to figure it out just by trying to stay calm as a parent. And I want to really cover this pretty specifically. We're going to dive into the research that supports the decision to act early. If you haven't already discerned, that is the conclusion we're going to be drawing today. But I hope that this training is really covering a lot of angles regarding when is the right time, and also covering some anecdotal experience I've had. And call us later. Have a conversation with us and then say, hey, we want to get started with you a couple months from now. So if you tend to believe that might be your pattern before you pick up the phone and talk to our team, then the show is definitely for you as well. So because if you're in the information gathering stage, and that information gathering stage takes less than a week, then I am going to be a good coach and tell you what you need to hear instead of what you want to hear. Your information gathering stage is not is way too long. You're actually in an indecision stage and an inaction stage, which is procrastination. You do not need to take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months to find the right time to change your child's life and to change your life. So I really hope that you take this to heart and you hear what I have to say about what's going on in your child's mind, as well as in your mind, when we're taking clear and consistent action to turn this around swiftly. Because that's what can be done. You know, we've seen it with our team time and time again. And so I never want to hold you to a standard that I can't offer. But I also don't want you to believe that if you don't work with us, you can't produce that. So if you haven't been able to produce that result and you haven't worked with us, then sure, let's get on the phone. But if you can stop the meltdown cycle and do that within 8 weeks, more power to you. Great, keep it rocking. So observe, the first thing that I want you to hear is that if other people have been able to do it, so can you. And that's number one, when we're talking about supporting your child in growing out of their meltdown cycle. That takes clear and consistent work. It's not something you can lead up to chance. You don't grow into learning a new language unless someone is actually speaking that new language to you. And emotion management is a language. And I want to speak about this particularly because there's lots of studies that support this. So one of the studies that I'm going to quote here is, let me look at, I could just click on this button. Maybe not. I think I just told my computer to do something else. I'm going to just tell you. So the study titled Maternal Executive Functioning, Harsh Parenting, and Child Conduct Problems in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry, published in 2012, discusses the difference between children who grow up in chaotic households and whether or not those parents implement calm down strategies for themselves. They learn their own coping skills, and how that tends to change the child's behavior compared to when parents learn to regulate themselves, and whether or not and their household is not chaotic, then and the impact that this has on children. So I want to talk about this because you might be thinking that since your child is not experiencing trauma, they're probably going to grow out of their behavior. And so this study was really impactful because when they studied traumatic households, so families who are moving a lot, God forbid, domestic violence happening, chaos in the neighborhood, right? So gang activity, for example, or harsh relationships, high conflict in the marriage, yelling in the marriage, even if it's not domestic violence. With physical abuse, perhaps emotional abuse. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about chaotic environment. We're also talking about chaotic environment if a family has fallen ill and it's another family member potentially is emotionally incapacitated, not able to take on everything because of the needs they have to hold down a job. Perhaps they're grieving, and in their grief there's depression, and then the child is struggling, bouncing from house to house, right? So that is what I would describe as a clinician, a chaotic household. Now, as a parent consultant, when I'm describing a healthy household, I'm describing parents who either work inside or outside of the home, who can communicate effectively without fighting with each other regularly, and also can provide the basic needs for their family. So food, water, shelter from a physical, and then are also focusing on basic emotional needs like validation, communication, and feelings work, and supporting a child in managing their feelings. Now, if a family has the level of stability that we're talking about in the second group here, where it's not chaotic, what we see through this research is that parents who don't learn to manage their emotions, who tend to yell at their kids, who tend to use harsh punishing, or who tend to use even physical punishment to include spanking with their children, those children tend to develop conduct problems, lying, stealing, violence, aggression, especially in adolescence, or risky sexual behaviors, as well as harmful behaviors. So if a child is born sensitive or not, if the parent is not emotionally regulated, they will, and they parent harshly, their child, sensitive or not, will develop problems. This is pretty clear in the research. There's a high correlation and even a causation for a child to develop these issues. I am a living case study in that, as well as countless families and parents that we've worked with who came from households where their parents didn't know. I mean, our parents in the 80s and 90s raising us didn't understand what harsh parenting did to our psyches. So we just had to figure it out in adulthood when we were ruining relationships, right? So if you don't want to parent your kid in a way that they have to grow up in spite of you, then this is definitely a show for you. And I want to encourage you to notice that now is the time for you to learn to stop yelling at your kid, to stop punishing, to stop using timeouts, to stop using rejection in your parenting as a tool to control your kid's behavior. Because when that happens, your child will actually tie love to control, which can make them more susceptible to engaging in relationships that take advantage of them. So talking about promiscuity in young adulthood, I'm talking about seeking false attention to include popularity and superficial relationships, seeking over their values. I'm talking about taking risky decisions, substance abuse decisions that lead to even substance dependence. And these are all clear in countless research. I just quoted one research study that doesn't teach that research. But, being the good professional that I am, I stay up with the research. So rather than just citing stuff you can probably go Google, what I want to talk about is what's going on for you and your thinking process that may lead to your hesitation or your disagreements with your spouse or co-parent in terms of what could be holding you back from making decisions. Because if your kid's behavior at 4 years old was knockdown, drag out, meltdowns, and now they're 7 or 8 and they're just kicking, you might think, well, we've made some progress. And while that's true in the sense that your kid's behavior has decreased in its intensity, it's also true that 7-year-olds are developmentally beyond the need for kicking when angry. So your kid is still behind. So, and I say that with love. I do want you to hear that though, because I'm not going to sugarcoat or play into any belief that things are just going to work out fine, because sensitive kids perform below their peers when their parent relationship is not positive and connected. All right. So what do you mean, Megan? I sit on the couch with my kid and walk them through their feelings and what they could do better next time. And it takes me a half an hour on a daily basis because this is what happens after they kick their brother. And we're not making any progress. And my child still argues with me and they shut down and say they don't want to talk about it. And then I'm back in the same cycle tomorrow. But I am efforting to get a connected relationship with my kid. What gives? Why are you telling me that I don't have a positive relationship? And I want you to hear me when I say that this relationship result that you have, where your child is not hearing and responding to you and also learning and changing their behavior, means that it's not positive enough for them. But I am not telling you that your effort is wrong. I'm telling you that it's insufficient. All right. So hopefully you can hear that with clarity. With clarity here, that there's that I'm not judging you, that telling you that you're bad, or who do you think you are, thinking that you're good to go here. But I would like to tell you that there are some things that you need to change if this is happening in your household, and it's not just your kid that needs to make these shifts. It's also your understanding of how to teach your child, and then also the timeline of testing whether or not what you're doing is actually leading to the result. Because Einstein said, Doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. And so, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So if you've been talking till you're blue in the face with your kid, and it's been months or even years where you're having these same conversations with, a different catalyst, for example, brother takes the toy compared to brother doesn't want to play, right? Same issue. When your kid's upset, they hit. Same issue. So what I want you to notice is that you need to zoom out, and it is time to address this problem. And I get it. You might have felt like you were actually addressing it, but I want to give you clarity on the timeline of how long you should be dealing with this problem before you're seeing clear and consistent results. I teach my clients that 2 weeks is a pattern. That means that if your child is making changes and your pattern of impacting that changes lasts for 2 weeks, you should see a significant improvement in your kid's behavior. If you're doing enough, we would see a shift in the behavior within 2 weeks. If you're doing enough in the right order, then we should see a change in your child's behavior. So if you've been at this for months, then what you're doing isn't plugging all the holes, and it's time to seek outside guidance. So I want to talk about this because and I told you that I would cover what I mean by positive environment, and I want to use this example here and share this imagery. So when we're talking about positive exposure, what I'm talking about is referencing Plewis's research. Now, Plewis talks about the relationship to parents and how it drastically improves a sensitive child's functioning. All right. And when your child's functioning is the same as their peers or below their peers, it means that over time you don't have enough positive connection. Your child does not feel like they can trust the level of connection that you're giving them, and there are holes in that relationship that need to be plugged. And so over time, if your child's behavior isn't improving, we're not seeing a change, then the relationship skills that you have need to change. Because over time, we should see an improvement in your child's level of functioning based on the understanding of vantage sensitivity, that there are certain genes and the biology that your kiddo has, being biologically sensitive, that indicates that they actually are more receptive and susceptible to your parenting. So what that means is that when you change your parenting, they drastically improve. And if you're not seeing a drastic improvement, that means that your parenting needs to change more. Okay, so whereas a non-sensitive kid is actually resistant to their environment, that means that they have to change from inside themselves, changing their perspectives, changing their beliefs, and then learning skills on their own. Your sensitive kid actually will not learn skills on their own. And this is why parents can get tripped up by saying, oh, Megan talks about how therapy is insufficient or ineffective for sensitive kids. And, but like a lot of people go to therapy. Well, look at the stats of therapy and look at the stats of what's effective. And then look at the stats of whether or not relationships can seriously change in just regular run-of-the-mill talk therapy. They're actually quite poor. And so while therapy as an industry has been around for a while, century plus, it doesn't mean that just because it's been around that it's actually sufficient. And the research on sensitive kids is over 30 years old. And so this is pretty clear here. Now, the research imagery that I'm showing you here, this is a 2012 study and report from Plewis. So it's not, it's 12 years old. It's not 30 years old. But this research stands the test of time because they have been testing and studying since the 1990s on biological sensitivity and changing parent relationships, and having parents report on how this impacts their children, and they're continuing to do more and deeper study. And I have a show podcast episode regarding whether or not the sensitive trait is genetic. And I produced that in the spring of 2024. So you can go ahead and watch more about that if you'd like. Now, I'm showing an image if you're watching this podcast on YouTube or Facebook. And the image that demonstrates here is that there are certain people in the section of person A here on the image where that they are more receptive and sensitive to their vantage point in life. That means that they will actually, wherever they stand in their family relationship, impacts how they see themselves and impacts how they talk to themselves, and it impacts how they feel capable, which then obviously impacts whether or not they take actions that are positive and developed resilience, where they are learning a skill from home and they're taking it into the world and they're demonstrating it out of the home, and they're demonstrating it in the home. So resiliency is a internal characteristic. It cannot be considered a compartmentalized characteristic. You're either resilient internally and you see yourself as resilient, or you're not. You can't compartmentalize an identity. So you can pretend, and there's always room to grow. But when we see resilient human beings and we see people who persist through challenge, they do that in every aspect of their life. Not necessarily at like the highest level in every category, but they're not seriously lacking in one avenue of their life and then like performing above and beyond in another avenue. Typically, it's more level in the gap. Through various categories of their life: family, relationships, school or academics, or learning, personal development, community. And then internal talk. So when we study this, because it all comes back down to whether or not you see yourself as a fixed person or somebody who's always changing, that perception isn't something that you just only view in one area of your life, right? So Carol Dweck's research on the growth mindset would be applicable to this concept. So let's go ahead and cover what is necessary for you to understand when it's time to change your family dynamic. Now that you know that your child, given their temperament, is more susceptible to feeling connected to you. And if your kid says things like, you don't understand me, or you don't get me, or you're not listening, even though you're going back and forth with them and you're talking, you're not tuning them out, what they're saying is that they don't feel heard and understood by you. And while you're taking it in and you're trying to teach them, it's not landing. You're not speaking the same language. And so they are responding with, you're not hearing me. And the context of their words is actually less important than the meaning behind their words, because they're kids. So they're not going to be very good at telling you really what's going on. But what they will do is give you signals, signs, and inferences that they're not able to regulate their emotions, and what you're doing to teach them isn't making lasting change. And so that's clear in where we're looking at the data and the numbers here. And when we teach our clients to track the data, we're getting even more specific regarding number of hits a day, number of meltdowns a day, number of yelling moments a day, and also number of skills that we teach a day, and helping parents notice that when I raise my skills, my child's behavior goes down, and we teach them to use either a spreadsheet or we recommend some apps to track behavior. And when parents do that, they stay out of the anecdotal, I think things are going pretty well, I mean, last week was good, to actually, we had a great week last week, and the week before, I remember we made some significant changes in the environment, and that's, now we're seeing some responsivity here. And this week we had a blip on the radar, but overall, statistically speaking, we're still making progress. And so as a parent, it is important to raise your child based on data and based on the research, and you probably value that because you've been Googling up till the middle of the night, multiple nights a week, trying to decide what the right construct is to raise your kid, right? So if you had the freedom to learn how to track the data with your kid, then you probably would be much further along in solving this problem if you knew what to look for, if you knew what to track, and you knew what to do to affect change. And this is important because when you raise your child from a research-backed manner, and you make decisions in parenting that are intentional based on your child's skill gaps, it is important to understand whether or not what you're doing is actually making changes. So when I was a clinician working with clients whose kids, they came in and they said, pediatrician diagnosed ADHD, and I'm thinking about medication, but I want to try therapy first, right? So they would come in to work with me. We would do play therapy, and then I would be teaching in a certain way the skill sets they need, noticing their child has a sensitive nervous system and has some executive functioning skills. And then when I would work with them now I'm not a medical provider, I'm not a prescriber. So we'd work in tandem with the prescriber, and I would say, what is the prescriber advising you in terms of the needs that the child needs to demonstrate? How do you know that the medicine is going to be working? And they were like, I don't know. They said it's supposed to take a little while, and which, by the way, for ADHD meds, like, you should see a pretty swift change for a fair amount of them. They don't need, like, they recycle through the body. They cycle through the body pretty quickly, most of them. Yeah, and we should just let them know. And so what we would do when I was a clinician, this is something that I advise my clients if they're also working with a prescriber for their child, even as a consultant, when I'm not treating the child for any mental health need. I'm teaching the parents how to parent differently. I specifically say that you need to be clear on what behaviors you want to see a shift in. And you need to measure that against 2 weeks of a medical intervention, because if you're not going to see any changes within those 2 weeks, especially for ADHD, for example, then you won't know what you're testing for. You could have your kid on medication for forever. You could be switching medication when your feelings are dictating how you medically provide care to your kid, right? Like, if your kid was sneezing and you felt like the sneezing was over or should be over by now, would you stop giving them the what do we give our kids? The echinacea or whatever, elderberry syrup, or extra vitamin C, just because you felt like it was supposed to be done by now? No, you track, is my kid still sneezing as frequently as they were last week or yesterday? And you check with the kid, how are you feeling, right? Does your throat still hurt? Do you need extra honey? Things like that. You can see I'm a little crunchy when I'm talking about what I give my kid. I don't tend to give my kid, Tylenol or Motrin or anything unless it's a pretty big pain. But, to each their own. That's not, I'm not making medical claims or advice on this show here. But what I'm talking about is noticing that for a head cold, sure, anecdotally, you could be like, hey, did you sneeze less or more today? Do you still need it? Okay, great. Right. That's helpful for, for easy concerns. But when you're making decisions that could alter your child's brain chemistry or could alter the way your child's brain is wired, you need to be tracking data here, which is what we do when we're training our children's brains to respond to stress differently. We teach our clients to track the data. And I don't know if anybody else does that, but I've been through a fair amount of I used to purchase a lot of parent courses when I was a clinician so that I could see what was underneath the hood and say, hey, you go do that while I go do the therapy for your kid, right? And, the regular run-of-the-mill mommy bloggers or, corporate ladies who decide to run parenting courses, or even therapists who are teaching general gentle parenting in their, in their courses, they're not teaching you how to track your data. And so I don't advise parent change and child change that isn't data driven, because you could be 3 feet from gold and making changes for your kid and give up too early. And that will obviously prevent you from helping your kid grow out of the emotional intensity. And when I say grow out of the intensity, I mean the extreme behaviors. I don't mean the fact that your kid stops feeling deeply, because that's part of their temperament. They will feel deeply, but it doesn't mean that they need to scream or cry or hit or yell. Telling your kid that their feelings are out of proportion to the circumstance at hand, does your react like any of that? We've seen the level systems like green, yellow, blue systems at school. Zones of regulation, for example, is one of them. There's plenty where they're trying to match a kid's behavior and emotions to the circumstance and training the kid to react less intensely. That cognitive process, that thinking process, is incredibly invalidating for sensitive kids because they feel deeply. The problem is they're reacting intensely too, and those are two separate issues. And if you tell your kid that their feelings are tied to their behavior at the point where they shouldn't feel intensely because that's what leads to their big behavior, you're teaching your sensitive kid in the wrong way. So it's not going to be efficient and can be chronically invalidating, which creates a traumatic response in the brain for the child. So it is important for us to really make sure we're making clear and consistent data-driven decisions to turn the dynamic around. Why do we do that? I want to share with you, this is something that I've shared before, either on different podcasts, another image. If you're listening to this on the podcast, definitely check out the YouTube show for this episode, because we've got the imagery here, and timestamp it for yourself. So I've shared, this is the second image I'm sharing on this show. This Belsky research article was published in 2011. And what they were doing is they were noticing the plastic genes, so the moldable genes, right? How many children are more moldable to their environment, and those children that are more moldable by their environment, what happens to them when their environment becomes more positive? And when I say environment, I'm talking about, in the study, the parent-child reactions to each other and the interactions to each other and the skill sets, right? So we're talking about the study from, for families in general, that behavior problems are created or perpetuated when parents don't learn how to regulate their emotions and they continue to use harsh parenting. We know that in non-chaotic households, when parents change their parenting, the children are less likely to develop conduct disorders or demonstrate negative behaviors. And then we're seeing specifically for sensitive kids who are more susceptible to their environment, they actually perform above and beyond their peers. Different research study, more specific study, particularly related to sensitive kids. So we're talking about whether or not you should be looking at your kids' friends as the standard for your kids' behavior. Because if your kids' friends are not sensitive, or the peers that your sister's kids, whatever reference point you have, if they are not highly sensitive, then they're probably not the standard that you need to be comparing your child to. And we all do it, right? This is human behavior. We're social beings. We're going to look at other people to determine whether or not we are living up to par. And it is the process of the brain to stop seeking external validation and instead looking for social motivation, social collaboration to keep you supported on your own goals, rather than looking for people to tell you it's all going to be fine and dandy. Because if you told your friend's kid, like your friends, about your kid's needs that you just shared, we were talking about the circumstance earlier, your 7-year-old's hitting and kicking, smacking at an intensity, they would probably tell you, well, that's not happening in my house. I mean, my kid is meeting average grades and having fun and whining and complaining and wants to watch too much screen time, but my kid's also not going to the extremes with their behavior. So you might think, okay, well, I can deal with this behind closed doors, but your kid is stuck in fear, frustration, overwhelm, and sadness and self-deprecating statements or self-deprecating belief, because they're acting in a way that someone who doesn't value themselves is acting. And so if that's the case, then it's distressing to your child. They feel crappy. They report to you that they feel like they're a bad kid, or they deny it, which is a shame response. So you can't tell me that your kid isn't bothered by this behavior and isn't seriously distressed by how violent and aggressive they're getting. That's an out of control circumstance that they have in their body. And so it is time for you to make changes if this is going on, because your kiddo is suffering, and you might not think that you're suffering, but I invite you to notice what you're willing to put up with and what message you're sending to your kid if you're not making clear and consistent action. So to turn this around, and if your action is not data driven, to actually see results. So I want to talk about this because I want to share a personal circumstance, and I'll close this because I explained this this image in different shows. I'll take it down. But, I had a circumstance when my kiddo was 18 months old. I was working in a private practice. I was not the owner. And so I was working part-time. And because I was a child therapist, I was seeing clients after school. And I was working, I think, 5 days a week, if I remember correctly. And so because of that, my daughter, my first kid, she was getting, we were asking the daycare to take care of lunch and dinner because we didn't want her to eat at like 7 o'clock at night. Specifically, my child had eating problems, and one of the reasons why I knew that she was highly sensitive in temperament was because she did have some sensory aversions at a very, very early age. She had a hard time when she was pretty young keeping some of the food down. And so she wasn't failure to thrive, but she had a really high gag reflex. Solid foods that were like the mixed solid, so it was like mushy plus stuff in it, right? Like the baby spaghetti, things like that, or like the baby food that was like mashed up tomato sauce and then chunks of food in it. She couldn't handle it. She would gag and puke it up, and then we ended up with my supply. I had to bottle feed, so she wouldn't just puke up the food. She would also puke up the whole bottle she had just eaten. When we were giving her like different tastes to try the baby food, and this was like earlier than 18 months, obviously, but like it was very obvious that with the breastfeeding challenges that I had, and then also with the with the gag reflex that she had, her spit up was intense, and then also she had a hard time with the tactile stuff regarding the food. So she was curious. It wasn't a psychological aversion. It was definitely a sensory aversion. And so I was working with my colleague, just observing and testing and trying some things based on my experience, always working with OTs in tandem. We have an OT on staff here at MTC to advise parents, because our work as mental health consultants is not holistic enough if we're not paying attention to the sensory impact. So, excuse me. So because of that, I had a close relationship. I was just asking and describing the needs, and we were working on that. We got it figured out that she just needed to eat, she couldn't eat combo food. She could eat solid food, and then she could eat liquid food, but she couldn't eat liquid solid food. Mushy stuff was just not her cup of tea for a little while. And so then once we got into, because of that, and having made a fair amount of progress at 18 months, she was eating solids, and she was being, just fed milk and solids. And it was important to ensure that she was given lots of food options. And my child is an extrovert. Both my girls are. But she loved to play, and she was not very interested in eating. So it did take a fair amount of support at home to help her consume enough calories. And it wasn't I had never done the clean plate club or anything like we got when I was growing up, but I did understand what the portion size of a baby at that age would be. And one of the typical adages that OTs will tell me is that the size of your child's palm is the size of their stomach. So, supporting that understanding so that I wasn't working on overfeeding her. Like, I didn't need her to eat everything that I put on her plate, but I did need her to do more than a bite, right? So that was the whole process. And I worked with the daycare providers and I had a conversation with them. And the problem was, because I was a clinician doing late night sessions, the daycare was consolidating their staff. And so my daughter for dinner would go to a different classroom. So the message that like what is helpful for lunch would get lost in telephone, the game of telephone, when they had like the shrunken staff ratio, filler staff member caring for the rest of the kids towards the end of the work day. And so I would talk to the director over and over again. My kid needs to eat, like, share with me. I want you to make sure that whatever she doesn't eat comes home. Don't throw it out, so that I can observe and I can track, right? I can pay attention to this. And this is not like first kid syndrome. This is, my child has had some sensory needs and I'm paying attention, right? Because I'm not a stay-at-home parent. I can't observe it all. I'm asking for a team member that I'm delegating care to support me in this. So the challenge we had was that I was getting the yeah, and then the paper would come home with no information, or the food wasn't in they had tossed it, right? So I didn't have the reports that they would give me, and I don't know, she got fed right before my shift, before I took over this classroom, so I don't know. Okay, so the message got lost, and the person that fed her dinner was already gone for the day. So this was happening fairly frequently, and we were working on it, and I remember the doctor appointment when I met with the doctor at her 2-year-old checkup, and the doctor said that she hadn't gained any weight. And this is between 18 months, because we had her checked up for that, and then at 2 years old. So for 6 months, my kid was basically keeping homeostasis. And for a sensitive child who where food was just not her favorite thing to pay attention to, this was very concerning, because we had already had the issues that I'd mentioned before, in her early life, where she wasn't failure to thrive, but we had to supplement. I had to do syringe feeding. It was a whole thing when she was super little. And so at this point, I decided to just pull the plug on the whole childcare situation. We were going to go with a nanny. I was going to figure out a way to make that happen with my career and also afford it. And we were going to go in that direction. So what did I do? When my child had a need and I knew that it wasn't developmentally appropriate based on her behavior, immediately we left that facility. There was only one other facility at the time in my town, and I had called CPS on that facility. So there was no way I was going to, because, I was a clinician, right? So mandated reporter, had to make a report based on parents' history of sending their kid to that place. There's no freaking way I was going to do that. And so I figured out a way to hire a nanny, because I started my own practice and changed my income immediately. I'm not kidding. Like within a month, figured this out. My husband and I said, we're going to do this. It's going to be feel risky, but I'm not willing to continue to have this conversation and have this result go for another 6 months to the next doctor appointment. Absolutely not. Right? So what was going through my mind when I made that decision? Because when you're thinking about, okay, my kid is 7 and they're still hitting, what's up? You might be wondering whether or not now is the right time. You might be thinking maybe it's the holidays are coming, so maybe I can work on this in January. And I will tell you that at that point, when I started my own practice, it was the middle of the summer. It was the non-busy season. for kids, for kid therapy, because most parents, it's a kind of a joke in the insider world, that when kids are on vacation and parents are on vacation, parents feel better, so then parents don't see their kids' mental health needs. It's historical. You can ask any child therapist this, that most parents tend to take breaks and or reduce or stop their kids' therapy during the summer. So, and then, magically the problems come back in the fall when parents notice, oh, wait, like sunshine and beach isn't what solves this problem, right? It just kind of masks the challenges that we're having. And so parents come back, right? So I was literally leaving my position when I, had the potential of having a 0-person caseload, like because caseload growth kind of slows down. Inquiries slow down as a clinician at this point. That didn't happen. I did have a pretty steady flow of people who knew that the work that I did was good. So I actually didn't take a lull, but it was a risk. I thought that I would have a risk. So I made that decision, did it anyways, because my kid is more important than my income. And I knew that we would figure it out. And then the alternative for me at this point was, okay, how am I going to start a business? When you start a business, you have to market, you have to build a website, you have to learn how to run your own computer system. I had 0 experience running a computer system for myself. I was on committees when I worked for hospital systems and government systems back in the day, but those are different systems than when you're running a private practice. So it didn't necessarily translate. And the practice that I come from ran paper systems. So it was, archaic. So I had to, figure all of that out. I had to, like I said, learn WordPress, learn how to market, learn Facebook ads, learn blog writing for, impacting people's perception of my authority on the topic versus just like, I ate this food and it's delicious, right? That's a different kind of blog writing. It's a different skill. Marketing, blog writing. And then I had to obviously see clients and obviously parent. There was no hobby happening. Paint. We had a dog, right? My husband was working full time and traveling a lot. He was out of state traveling, or out of overnight traveling 4 days a week. So parenting my sensitive kid at that point, she wasn't necessarily sleeping through the night every night either. And I got to tell you, I did what it took. I stayed up late. I stayed up till 1, 2 in the morning, working on the websites, learning, taking courses, hiring mentors, and then had the nanny. And when we had sessions, if a session was canceled, I would use that time I would use it effectively, right, to catch up on some of the business management. And while that was an incredibly time-pressed season of my life, I will tell you that I do not regret making that decision one bit. And in fact, I am even more passionate with parents who tell me that they can kick the can down the road 6 months from now. Because imagine what it would be like if your kid's emotional needs weren't in question, but it was your kid's physical needs not in question. Because obviously I knew that if no one was caring for my kid's physical needs, that they sure as heck weren't paying attention to my kid's emotional needs, because they didn't even care if she was being fed, right? Enough to pass the baton to an effective person taking on the shift. I didn't, So, of course, there was an extra concern there, but I want you to ask yourself, why do you delay when it comes to your own emotional needs? Because some of you knows that you need to make different emotion management skills yourself. And if you're not learning about that, then why is it okay for you to neglect yourself? What message did you receive, either in childhood or in societal conditioning, that putting yourself last is okay? That your perception of supporting your family is just about putting a roof over their head and make sure that there's food on the table? What about living your best life requires you to just think about your basic needs? So I hope that this story is supportive for you in making the decision that you need to work with somebody to turn this around ASAP, because no one was put on this earth to be miserable. And that message goes to you, it goes to your kid, it goes to your entire family, it goes to your other kids whose emotional needs are not being met at the level that you want to meet them, because you're spending so much time talking your kid into remembering what they're supposed to do when they're upset. So the family dynamic psychologically is being run highly inefficiently. And I would implore you to determine what you're putting first for your kid and what limiting belief you have that you're lying to yourself about, right? Like I said, I could have made that decision to wait until we had a huge nest egg to pay half the nanny's salary, before we made the decision to invest in hiring the nanny. We were paying the nanny more per hour than we were paying the daycare facility, right? And so because of that, it was it was a stretch. And I was also taking, like I said, taking a risk in my career, being solely responsible. And the hours that I had designed to work, I had to now run a business and do the admin work. So I couldn't have those all be like client service hours like they were before. So obviously there's things I did to manage that. I changed my pricing and things like that. My service fee came in to take care of the business well, but it still was a risk, right? And for me, it wasn't a question whether or not I would be risking my kids' emotional, physical health in order to play it safe and play small in my career. That, to me, playing big in my career allowed me to provide more opportunities for my family, but I was not going to sacrifice my family while I was working on playing big in my career. And so if you have that scarcity mindset where you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, then you'll never get ahead in raising your children and teaching your children to play big, to reach for the stars. And your children need that from you because they're highly sensitive. They will want to perform above and beyond their peers because they know they're capable of that. So you have to lead from the front. All right. So again, if you want to learn more about the mistakes that parents make when they're parenting sensitive kids and what you can do to turn this around and what it takes to actually make clear, consistent, and impactful action work in your family, so that this no longer becomes the time suck in your mental conversation, your actual conversation with your spouse, with yourself in your head at bedtime and beyond, then I encourage you to go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/3mistakes. Make sure that you have the education that matters to turn this around in your household, and do that way faster than you think you need to, because the freedom and the opportunities that are available to you on the other side of this transformational growth are just boundless. Honestly, like, we've had countless families where the freedom to give energy to, again, like I said, their careers, their family, their leadership opportunities in their community, because their family's no longer struggling and they no longer feel weighed down, bogged down by that need, are just countless. So, and I know you've seen and heard some of those families in last week's episode. So I encourage you to go ahead and go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/3 word mistakes, 3 mistakes, /3 mistakes, and register. Watch the training. Learn more about what it takes to truly break down the meltdown cycle in your household so that you no longer have to live in crisis reactivity. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.